Welcome to the Problem Gambling Podcast. I'm Barry Grant, an addiction counsellor with Extern Problem Gambling. And my co-host is Tony O'Reilly, also an addiction counsellor with the project and the co-author of the book Tony 10. And today we're delighted to have a brilliant guest who we've been hoping to have on for a long time and who is one of the biggest, I suppose, advocates for recovery from gambling addiction on the island of Ireland. His name is Oisin McConville. He's Gaelic football All-Ireland winner. I was looking at your list of so many different titles that you've won in Ulster and intercounty level and at club level. It's absolutely frightening because I also saw on your Wikipedia page that you're 3 years younger than me, and that just scares the bejesus out of me. So I know she's also an addiction counsellor, and he's working with Sporting Chance, which is an organisation that was set up by Tony Adams, former Arsenal England football player. And Oisin, you might tell us a little bit more about that when we're talking today. But welcome aboard, Oisin McConville. Thanks a million for taking the time to talk to us today. How are things up in your neck of the woods at the moment?
Thanks, lads. Thanks for having me. Things up here are very much like they are the rest of the country. The only people we're seeing at the minute is our families. So it's the first time around. I think there was that novelty sort of thing. I think I spent an awful lot of time traveling, an awful lot of time on the road, a lot of time away from home. When the first lockdown came around, it was manna from heaven for me because it gave me an opportunity to stay at home. It gave me an opportunity to, spend a lot more time with the kids. We have 3 kids, 8, 6, and 2. And as I said, the weather was a lot better. It was more enjoyable. I have to say, this time around, it definitely has been a lot tougher. And I think not just on as far as us as adults and what we're used to doing, but in particular for kids, and just one of the simple things. Our youngest boy, he's 6, and he just loves school. He loves the interaction, and he misses that big time. And I can see, you can just see how you can see somebody struggling. The other guy, he wouldn't care if he never goes back to school, and he has that many interests outside of his friends that he's still able to interact with them in a way through PlayStation or playing games or whatever. So I can see how one lad is really, really struggling, the other one, as I say, he's prospering.
Yeah, and it's like you were saying there, like the first lockdown, I think, was a novelty, and a few people kind of took it as a bit of downtime, and they made their banana bread and they did all their yoga and whatever, their Joe Wicks and all that sort of stuff. This time around, I mean, a lot of people are struggling this time around. Like I'm sure you're seeing it in your work, and friends and family, and Tony's seeing it as well, and I'm seeing it every day talking to people in counselling sessions. Like, this one's a slog. This is a tough one.
I think the big thing for me this time is that I always see stuff in other people. This time I've seen a lot of stuff in myself that I wouldn't be, that I realise there's still a little bit of work to be done there. I attempted, I think I've attempted to eat my way through this one, but that doesn't work either because, one of the things I think in my recovery that was really good was there was a nice bit of balance there. There was, eating fairly well, modicum exercise, and there was a nice, as I say, balance and mix of things going on. It's harder to get that mix now, I feel.
Yeah, definitely. And I think people's energy and their motivation to do it is kind of at an all-time low, and it's the worst time of the year to be trying to do any of that stuff.
Yeah, I think sometimes I sit at night and I think sometimes the best thing I can do is buy another piece of equipment because that's definitely going to motivate me. But as we know, it doesn't work like that. It actually works in an opposite way. But that hopefully we get there with it. I think people have learned maybe this time, as much as there's a lot of people struggling, I think a lot of people have learned not to be too hard on themselves. this time around that, it is obviously exceptional circumstances. And I suppose that's the one thing I would say to people is just don't be too hard on yourselves, this time around. Don't have too high of expectations, just have little small goals. And in the house, that's sort of where we're working at the minute.
Yeah.
Just
No.
come in there,
Sorry, Tony. Yeah.
just come in there, like it's working in Coombeer at the time with the aftercare meetings. I always remember one person saying he had a bad week and it was just about holding on. So I think sometimes even going through this, as you said, the third part kind of lockdown, it's kind of like sometimes it's just about holding on. We don't have to be meeting our expectations or whatever that looks like. But I think I know for me, I've struggled probably most in this one, and you're trying to eat your way out, but I was trying to buy my way out of it, because I found that old behaviours were definitely coming back in regard to shopping and online. And it's amazing how similar it is or was to what it was like when gambling, like nearly the kind of ritual of buying and then waiting for it arriving, and sometimes even trying to hope that it arrives the day that my partner's not here so she doesn't see the stuff arriving through the door. And then it goes into the wardrobe and you never see it again. But it's just about kind of, and it's facilitating that and kind of rationalizing, say, well, if I'm after missing out on a holiday, or I'm after missing out on meeting the lads for a night out, so I'm going to buy myself something to reward myself. I suppose, because I suppose in recognition of the same behaviours that would have been there with the gambling, I was drifting into a place that I didn't want to be in. So it was interesting to kind of catch myself and for once kind of practice what I was preaching to other people. So it's good.
And I think the most important thing for us, like, because sometimes we think we have, because of the the walk we're in and all that sort of thing. Sometimes I think we feel as if we have it licked, we have it sorted, and just to admit to yourself and not be too disappointed in yourself, and also to be able to recognize it is the big one for me. Yeah. And that's always been the big one since since the first day I went into it's the first day I get into treatment. It was always about starting to recognize things. I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, my self-awareness, when I was gambling, was 0. In fact, if you go any lower than 0, I would go there. But there was no self-awareness,
Yeah, and I would have that bit of self-awareness now. It doesn't always work in stopping the behaviour, but I catch myself a lot of times just before it gets to a problematic level. But it usually comes in times of uncertainty or insecurity. That would have been there from years ago, from kind of childhood and stuff, like buying things to make myself feel better or feel secure. I used to surround myself with nice things. I kind of still do it to a certain extent to make myself secure. But I think there is a huge awareness, and it is about allowing yourself a little bit of it, but also to recognize when a little bit has gone too far. And that's what I try to get that balance back in, like what you mentioned beforehand. It's difficult to get it in, especially when you don't have those other outlets that you usually have, like even just going for a coffee with a friend, or even just meeting up with someone, or going down to see family and friends down in Carlow. Like, you don't have that at the moment. And I don't know about yourselves, but I tend to drift into the old behaviours because of that lack of things that tend to regulate my emotions. That would have been definitely a big part of recovery.
Yeah, and I think that's the situation for so many people at the moment, that we're all seeking comfort in the things that we have formed a relationship with over the years. And for some people that's chocolate bars, and for some people it's gambling, and for some people it's bottles of whiskey, and it's different things for different individuals. And I suppose there's a lot of comfort stuff going on, where on the first lockdown people were running marathons around their back gardens and on their balconies and stuff. It ain't happening this time, as far as
there's like just even that. Almost felt pressure first time around to be doing something constructive. You were talking about baking and all that. We did a bit of building onto the house and stuff, and put in a wee room with pool table and darts board and TV and all that sort of thing. And you can go and switch off there, but like, it nearly drove us bananas doing it. First time around. We are seeing the benefits of that now, but as I say, at the time I sort of felt under pressure to have some sort of plan, or to have some sort of project that we were getting stuck into, and like, as you say, all the people that were running marathons and climbing mountains, and baking, and I have mates who I never ever thought I'd see baking, but they're all baking, and I was sitting at home, I was going, I need to stop baking. You know what I mean? Because all these people are going to leave me behind. But like I promised myself, my kids are in Gaelscoil, and I promised myself that first time round that I was going to get back in. I obviously did Irish to quite a decent level when I was at school, but it's all gone. And I said to myself, I'm gonna learn Irish again, but that still hasn't happened. But I have that wee goal in the back of my head, but it's tough with 3 kids, full time.
You find, just touching on the bit you're talking about people running marathons and doing stuff on their back gardens, do you find that even looking at social media now, there's not as many of those videos now that there was at the very start? I think people's mindsets have changed, or even how it doesn't reflect what we were talking about, how the mood is different, so that people aren't putting up these videos as much. There's the toilet roll challenge of people keeping the toilet roll upsies, what do we call it, or keep up the upsies, whatever you just call it. But there's not as much as that, as far as I can see. Maybe I've just switched off from social media a bit more, but just doesn't seem there's much positivity in this lockdown, which would then, just to bring it back to the gambling or addiction side, you'd always wonder, would that kind of lead people down a path that maybe they mightn't want to go in regards to coping with it in different ways? Because there was, like, you had the Sir Tom over in the war veteran walking around his garden. You had all that kind of really positivity, people coming on and doing different kind of projects and stuff. But there doesn't seem to be that much this time around, I feel, anyway.
No, like my wife would tell you, we were literally doing there was a video. We were doing a video of something or other every single day, and it was enjoyable because it was a break from the norm. But definitely, that's not happening this time around. With all the fundraising and all the different things were going on, that's lost its momentum, and I think that people are just tired. I think people at this stage are tired, and I'd be talking to gays who are maybe in a bit of bother, and the bedtime just keeps getting later and later, and then all of a sudden it's earlier and earlier, and there's no rhythm, or there's no plan, there's no normality, there's no first time round we did a week of homeschool and just completely gave up on it because we just weren't in that zone. This time around, it's like a military operation. Fucking the kids are up at 9:15. They're sitting down to do their Zoom for an hour. The next boy, he's in. He does that. One comes in, does the homework. The other one does the homework. They get a share half out. And all these sort of things. And then we're able to let go a bit at the weekend. People do their own thing. But I definitely think that, and I personally speaking would never have been one for too much structure, but I definitely think for kids structure is very, very important, and for addicts it is so important to have structure, and again, not to make that into we have to be accountable for every minute of every day, because when I left treatment, that was one of the misgivings that I had, was that I had my day planned out Monday to Sunday. I knew what I was going to be doing in every single hour. Now, a lot of that was fear. A lot of that was fear because I didn't want to go back, to gamble again. A lot of that was me making sure that I had this plan and I knew it in my head, and it was off to a T, and I was writing it down. I was doing all those things. And then as time moves on and things begin to become a little bit more normal for you, that structure isn't there anymore, but there's still a structure. And the thing that I would have found with this, the lockdown, I probably don't want to keep talking about the lockdown, but the thing I found with the lockdown is that those structures, for all intents and purposes, and we are creatures of habit in a lot of ways. But I also think that structure is so important to us, and this has definitely made me realize it more so than ever. And again, I'm not talking about planning every single hour of every single day, but I'm talking of having things in your day. Like I would have things in my day where if things were normal, you know what I mean, my day would be structured in a certain way to try and get the most out of the day. But you know, this time around we have been a lot more rigid, and to be honest, it has made definitely for a happier house.
Tony, did you want to come in there? No.
No. I was
Oh,
just
sorry. Yeah. No, I mean that thing of the routine. Like, I mean, this is something myself and Tony would talk to people a lot about in the early stages. So somebody just red raw in crisis and trying to stop gambling, you know, might be day one, week one, whatever. And that thing of, okay, do plan it down to the T, right?
Yeah.
Plan your free time down to the T, what you're talking about. Tony's spoken about this before. One of his clients had this whole system up on the board, and they had this whole kind of scheduler and a planner, and we had this app out called Recover Me. They do something similar, and you know, people do it in different ways. You can do it on the back of an envelope or on a post-it or whatever. And I suppose if you're in the early stages of recovery, which a lot of people who'd be listening to the podcast will be, and they'll be looking for inspiration, looking for ideas, and I suppose motivation and inspiration from people like yourself who'd be in long-term recovery, like Tony, Niall McNamee, other people that we've had on who'd be in long-term recovery. That thing, trying to get through the early stages were like that. You're saying you had it planned down to the T, because I suppose something I was hoping to kind of pick your brain about today, like lots of people will be aware of your story of how you developed an addiction and some of the things that happened during your addiction. And I recommend anybody who wants to learn more about Oisin's story to get his book, The Gambler. It's excellent. But I suppose what we did as well, I think at the very start, when we were starting out just talking with Tony, we just said, look, if you want to hear Tony's story of addiction, buy the book Tony 10, right? Or look at the documentaries or the YouTube clips or the news clips or whatever it is. And we spoke about Tony's recovery, which wasn't really covered in the book. And I suppose that's what a lot of people, even today, we're getting an email off a guy talking about what he's getting from the podcast, because you'd notice yourself, it's mostly men for the time being. We're going to see more and more women seeking help, that's for sure. And men are not great help seekers across the board, whether it's gambling or anything else. And if they can find any other way of getting the information or the help or the advice without interacting with another human being, that's the first thing they will do, right? And I said, we're all men here, so that's the first thing we will do, right? So the podcast, I think, for some men in particular, and women, we have some female listeners too, they'll do that before they pick up the phone or send an email or send a text or go to a meeting or go to a counseling session or a treatment center, right? So if that's the case, that's a way of getting some useful information across to people and a bit of inspiration as well. So like if we were to look at, let's assume lots of people have heard your story, because I've been on different conferences and talks with you, and Tony has told the story hundreds of times, and you must be sick to your back teeth of telling your story at this
I'm only sick listening to myself.
So let's assume that a lot of people know your story, and because I don't want to go dragging you down that path again, unless you specifically want to, maybe that'll come into it. But like, what was the biggest thing for you, or in the early stages, if you can cast your mind back to the early stages of your recovery, the things that really helped you? If it was something like that, planning your time down to the last hour, to the last minute, or obviously you went for, did you go through Coonmura as well?
Yeah, I went through Coonmura, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean,
and it's as people know, that's a 12-week program. If people ask me now about it, there's I suppose there's different ways I could describe it. But if I can go back to sport for a second, and if you think about, I always consider my time in Coonmura as my pre-season training, if you like. Like why had my pre-season training done? So when I actually went into the match, you know, when I walked out through the door and I was starting to play, if you like, I had the work done, okay, but I still had to go out on the field and put that into practice, and that's the tough part. I mean, I used to play with loads of lads, and honestly, they wouldn't give you a kick at training, but they wouldn't get a kick when they played in a match. And the thing about the reason why I want to talk about the pre-season training is that I meet a lot of people nowadays, and the first thing they'll say to me is, I don't want anybody else to know. I'm not going to meetings. I'm not going into treatment.
Yeah.
can I do this? You've made life very, very difficult for yourself, but that doesn't mean that you can't do it. But the thing about, as I say, about pre-season training or going into a treatment center is that it makes your season or your life or your early parts of your recovery a lot more easier than if you're coming if you walk straight into a meeting, for example. But imagine not having either of those things. And I think, people are very, very scared of meetings in particular, because first thing they'll say to me is, I don't want to walk in there because I know I'll know somebody in there. And if I'm going to be honest, this lockdown has made the introduction of new members, for somebody who doesn't have to walk into the room but can go on to a Zoom meeting. It has made life for those guys a little bit easier. But I still think they're not getting the true worth of a meeting. It's still worth doing, obviously, but it's just not as effective as what it would have been. I still go back to the simple things that I was taught before I left that treatment centre. I was not carrying loads of cash around with me, and I know there's different ways to gamble, but I was one of those people who had cash and walked into a bookies. That was 95% of the gambling that I done. So not carrying a lot of cash around me, not hanging out in the same places, not frequenting the same places, not having the same group of friends, and detaching yourselves from the things that trigger your gambling. That sounds as if, I always thought as if that sounds like this guy, here's a guy who's blaming his friends for his gambling. That wasn't the case. But I knew when I was in that company that the tendency was for me to gamble. And that's why I think, for people who are in early recovery or people who want to get into recovery, I think the first thing is to get those couple of things and have somebody to look after your finances. That was the starting point for all of my recovery. And then the tough part starts, because you start to learn about yourself. I met Tony Adams. I read one book when I was in treatment, and that was Tony Adams' book. I didn't think I would have the opportunity to meet him or anything like that, but he talked at an event that I was talking at in Belfast one day, and he said something that resonated with me and stuck with me to this day. And he says, when you get into treatment, the best thing that you will get back is your thoughts, your feelings, and your emotions. And the worst thing you'll get back is your thoughts, your feelings, and your emotions. And when he said that, it just resonated with me straight away. And to be honest, it was my go-to thing a lot of times. Like, I lost my father during my gambling in 1989, and I stood at his grave in 2006, and that was the first time I mourned him. I stood at his grave and I cried, because before that, I didn't have the capacity to do that. And that was my feelings and my emotions coming back to me. But then you go about the process of walking through that. And that was one of the things. And there's a lot of triggers for people who gamble. A lot of people, talk to me about bereavement, and they talk to me about abuse of some form, physical or mental or whatever it was, bullying. There's obviously, when we gambled, that was what we did. That was the outward signs that there was something going on in the background. When we get into the background, that's when the real tough work started for me. So if you can imagine, I put all those things in place, and they're the easy things to put in place. Somebody looking after your finances, etc. But the thing for me was that when I started to talk about my insecurities, and when I started to talk about why I felt I gambled, I didn't just have to talk about it. I had to start walking through those things. Whenever I started to walk through those things, then I was in proper recovery. And then I felt there was an opportunity for long-term recovery. Because for the first year, I don't mind admitting it, it was like a roller coaster ride. I was just, I think it was you that said it, Barry. I was just hanging on and holding on and doing whatever it took to get through the next day. And then, that's not going to work forever. That's not going to work forever. But as I say, it got me through those initial 12 months and just that personal growth and that development and getting into recovery and speaking to people. That gave me the opportunity, as I said, to sort of kick it on to the next level and deal with the issues that I had. And some of those issues I didn't realize I had them until I get into recovery.
Yeah, and I think that's really important because I often bring this up with people in counselling sessions. You would have come across this, I'm sure, or heard the term of a dry drunk. In the area of alcoholism, there's an idea of a dry drunk, so a person who gives up alcohol, but other than that, they don't really change. They don't grow as a person. They don't change other ways of thinking or behaving towards people. So, but they have abstained from alcohol, which is kind of technically the idea, right? But there's no term for that in the gambling.
There is an argument, Barry, that those people would be better off drinking.
Yeah,
there is that. Yeah. There definitely is that argument, and I would have heard that term, very, very early on, because when I went to treatment, the majority of the people that I was in the group that I was in were drinkers,
Yeah.
And yet the underlying issues for them was the same as the underlying issues that I had. Sorry, I cut across you.
No, you're grand, man. And I think, there isn't a term for that in gambling, but I think it can happen. Though, okay, you're abstaining from gambling, you've taken that away, but you're miserable. You're hating every minute of it. That's not recovery. You've just abstained from gambling. That's the only change you've made. Now, there are benefits to that, obviously, to you and the people around you. But if you're more unhappy when you're abstaining from gambling than you were when you were in active addiction, active crisis, then that's a problem. You're not really.
That's the volcano, because that will erupt.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And I think that's the key for me as well, is that a lot of people, stop gambling but they never work a program. And until you start actually working a program, you won't get out of it what you deserve.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose just going back, because there's a few things you touched on there. I know I did a talk that you were talking up in Armagh 2 or 3 years ago, and we were talking about this idea of that I think it's access, time, and money. This idea of you're blocking the access. You might self-exclude from the bookies or self-exclude from online. You're managing the time, so you were talking about that earlier on. Kind of scheduling your time down to the last T. But I think at that event, I could be wrong here, and I've quoted you lots of times on this to different clients. So I really hope I'm not wrong. I think you said that your sister managed your money for 8 years, something like that. Am I way off there?
She managed them for 6 years.
Okay.
She came to me. I think, are you going to mention that? The thing, she came to me after 5 years. Is that the thing? No, but she came to me. Yeah. She came to me after 5 years, and she said, "Right, I think it's time to." And I said, "Yeah, look, I'll be down at the weekend." And I avoided her for 12 months. No, she only lives 3 miles away. Do you know what I mean? So,
I didn't know that.
But yeah, no. And the reason for that, Barry, was that I knew I was ready, but I wanted to be ready, and I didn't want that. One thing to hold me back. But yes, I knew when I was when I get into recovery, was like at the start of my recovery, I wanted the same things that I sort of wanted when I was gambling, if you know what I mean. If that makes any sense. I wanted my family to instantly trust me again. I wanted to have all the money back that I had lost. I wanted to have a very good job. I wanted to play football. But I wanted all these things to come back to me, and I wanted them all, as I say, instantly. And I soon realized, over a short period of time, probably, that none of those things was going to happen. And I remember the day that I felt trusted by my family again, and then that gave me the confidence to want to do other things and set other goals, and then that moved on to the taking taking control back of my finances and being able to manage money again. And the strange thing is that at home now, myself and my wife would manage it together, but I would feel that, you know, I'm actually pretty good at those things now, you know. But I certainly, it took away a lot of the fear when I come out of treatment, and she agreed to look after all my finances. I was working, so I would come home on a Friday evening and I would hand her the wages, and I had a consolidated loan. I had to pay that. That was all the debts that I had, and she was basically just paying whatever I was getting every week. And to be honest, I got to a stage very, very early on where I wouldn't even open my wage packet, so I didn't actually know how much money I was getting every week. I just knew that when she got it, she was paying it off the loan, and you know, it took me 8.5 years to pay that loan off. Two things about that: there was a huge discipline in it, and I felt in my own head that I was paying a price. If that makes sense.
Yeah. That
I had done the crime, and this was my way of doing the time, and it's not easy. That part is not easy because, again, I was, you know, still fairly young. I was getting to my feet. I'd met my wife after a couple of years out of treatment, and I wanted to do things. You know what I mean? You know, like there's certain material things that you sort of feel as if you need at that stage, but I was only able to have them. And I was unable to have them because I was paying off that loan. But at the end of paying off, I remember making the last payment, and it was very, very gratifying. First of all, to do that, but also, as I say, I felt as if I'd sort of paid a price in a way. Now, that maybe sounds like warped thinking on my part, but that was genuinely how I felt at that time.
I think a lot of people, that's come up quite a few times, that people quite often feel like, okay, I've dug myself into this hole. Now, sometimes people just want to skip to, I just want to get this over with, and they start paying down debt too quickly. I think a lot of time you have to reel people back in and say, hang on, that's the gambling mindset. There's no quick fix here. This is a long-term thing. You need money to live on. You need to be able to do other things as well. So, like, put a realistic, I always kind of recommend people, I think Tony would have gone to MABS as well back in the early stages of his recovery to get some budgeting advice around it, whether it's MABS or someone else, and put in
one of the things as well, Barry, that, you know, I was recommended for me to do by the one-to-one counsellor I had when I was in Coonwara was that I make a list of all the people I owed money to, and I made that list. And again, as I paid those people off through time, there was a certain amount of, you know, I've achieved something. There was a certain amount of, you know, making up for where I'd gone wrong. This is before I started walking the steps or anything else. But certainly that was a big thing for me, just to get all those people, you know, even if it was 20 quid or 5 or whatever it was, just to get all those people down and to walk up to them and, you know, and give them that money back and feel that sense of, you know, you've sort of righted a wrong, I feel like.
Yeah, I think that's a big one for a lot of people. Like, for a lot of people, it's kind of a mixed bag. So might owe a lot of money to the bank and the credit union and the credit card and all sorts of stuff. And quite often there's kind of personal loans, friends and family. Most people want to pay down the personal ones first for obvious reasons, because you know the person, and there's kind of guilt and shame and feelings around it. So quite often that is a nice feeling when you get those personal loans. Like, we all owe money to the bank in different ways, right? Whereas mortgages, car loans, whatever. That's, the bank is happy that you owe them money. That's how they make their money. That's not the end of the world necessarily. But usually it's those personal debts that people have a strong kind of emotional attachment to, and it is very gratifying, I think, to be able to get, okay, that one's off the list, and to get the feeling with that. But just as well, going back as well, because I mean, you were talking when you're talking about your sister managing the money for 5 years, and then she said maybe you should take back control, and then you ignored her, dodged her for 12 months. I hadn't remember that part of the story from before, but there's something you mentioned there as well, that you remember when you felt trusted by your family for the first time again. How long into your recovery was that?
That was over 4 years. and I remember like I was back home living with my mum, after I come out of treatment, and like I could, literally, I could be going to put something in the bin out the back, and she'd be saying, "Where are you going?" And I was 30 years of age, and I suppose the first instinct for me is to say, where do you think I'm going? But then I'd laid and cheated on these people for 16 years, and yet I expected to walk back in there and be trusted again. And I had somebody, I was lucky enough that I had stayed in touch with my one-to-one counsellor, and I was bouncing stuff off him for the first couple of months when I was out, and that was one of the things, and he just made me see it from their point of view rather than my point of view. And obviously that's something that we all do pretty regular now, is look at it from from somebody else's point of view. It doesn't necessarily have to be about gambling, but I just felt after about 4.5 years, I just remember, there was just this air of trust around me, and given a sense of responsibility. And this sounds ridiculous now for a 30-year-old, but
No.
whether it be pick their my sisters or brothers' kids up from school or the bus, or mind them for a couple hours, or different things like that. Like, that's something I had never done before. I was never there for the people around me. My father died in '89. I was nowhere to be seen. I was of absolutely no use to anybody. And yeah, I remember after, I say, about 4.5 years, and I remember just having that sense and being able to sit down and being able to talk to them, in those sort of terms, which is pretty shocking for them, because they're after, they're like, that initial part of recovery, like, to be sitting down and talking to, your siblings and your mum about things that happened, explaining things that had happened, what had gone on, why I felt like this, why I acted like that, but to be able to sit down and be able to talk to them, because that was something I couldn't do. I couldn't relate to them. I thought they were all sad because they weren't gambling thousands of pounds, every week, and I thought that my world was the world that people should be living in, and I was living in the real world, and they were in some way, living a fantasy or a lie or something. And even when I think about stuff like that, do you know what I mean? When I think about stuff like that, not even just then, but even now, when I think about, the way that I felt about the rest of the world and my family and all those sort of things, and how far down the pecking order everything else was, after gambling and scraping, begging, borrowing, stealing, hooking, scamming, scheming, and all to get money together, how far down the list all of those other things were in my life is absolutely astounding to me. But that's the world that I lived in at that time.
Yeah, and I think for so many people, I suppose that's why I kind of zoned in on the trust thing, because so many people, you probably would have seen this as well in your own work, like that. It's different from person to person. Obviously, a lot of people will relapse in their attempts to stop gambling. But a lot of people get into recovery. A lot of people that we work with, like, it's definitely possible. And I suppose that's something we're always trying to hammer home on the podcast. The recovery is possible, right? And for the starting point is you abstain from gambling, right? And you kind of give your head a bit of space, and somebody else manages your money. In a lot of occasions, that can go a long way. You manage your time. It could be the people, places, and things. You were talking about the friends earlier on. There's a lot of kind of common or garden, fairly sensible stuff that you can do to help you abstain from gambling. Then you need to work on yourself, obviously, as well, if you want to get into recovery. But the trust bit is the bit that takes the longest, I think, for everybody. Because, okay, you can stop gambling, you can get 3 months under your belt, 6 months under your belt, you can start thinking a bit more clearly. For some people, they can get back into reasonably okay financial place relatively quickly, depending on their circumstances. So that box is ticked. But I mean, if you've been lying, scheming, stealing, all that sort of stuff, friends, family, partners, everyone in your life, maybe employers, co-workers, you name it, for however many years, you can't just flick a switch and say, okay, trust me now. You know, it's the once bitten, twice shy thing, which we all have that. And I think that's the hardest part for most of the people I work with. They're 6 months down the line, 9 months, 12 months down the line. Everything else is going great, but in their kind of close relationships, they expect that the trust should be back at that point. And I suppose it's important that people can hear from you, because that sounds normal and reasonable to me, that if you're doing stuff for 16 years, that it could take up to 4 years before people go, okay, no, this time he really is, you know, in a good place.
It was definitely the toughest thing that I experienced in recovery, was the fact that, you know, as I say, when I walked back out, I didn't walk out into the house with my two hands out going, look it, I'm back. Prodigal son's back. I'm sorted, I'm cured. But the thinking wasn't that far from that. The thinking was, look it, you know, I'm doing the right things. I'm never going to gamble again. I felt in my head I was never going to gamble again. I felt as if, you know, I was ready to do all the right things. And yet, me saying that out loud, even to people close to me, you know, didn't seem right, because, you know, I'd let them down in so many ways before. Why should they be, like, as you say, why should they believe me this time? I mean, like you talk about, you know, people, you know, who relapse and different things like that. And then, you know, they learn so much from that relapse and then maybe get it second time around. At no stage did I feel as if I was going to relapse. I left treatment centre and my counsellor, my one-to-one counsellor said, never say that. Don't I want to hear you saying that. And I looked in his eye and said, I'm never going to gamble again. And his answer was, I really hope you're right. I look back at that and I'm thinking, I don't even know if he had that much faith in me, you know. But then you walk back into your own home and it's more real for them, because as I say, you've caused that hurt. You know, I had caused that hurt. I had caused the untold destruction before, and then financially, emotionally, you know, as I say, just not being there for people when they needed me. And, you know, you're fighting with that, but you're walking back through the door and you're going, no, that's not me. And you want to shout it from the rooftops, you know, and you want to fucking stand out the way Leo Varadkar or Mike Neil Martin have been standing out. You know, you want to tell the nation, I'm different this time. This is new. I am not going back. But people need time. The people who you've been hurting along the way, they need time for those scars to heal. And as I say, people always say to me, but how do I know when? And I say, you will know when. You will know when that happens. And I knew instantly when that happened. And I have to say, it was one of the greatest things I've ever experienced in my life. You know, I wanted to do, you know, I wanted to go out and I wanted to celebrate it and I wanted to jump up and down, but I wanted people to realize as well that, you know, that I could be trusted. And then once I realized that had happened, then it gives you a recovery a boost as well. When I went into recovery, I met a guy in Gamblers Anonymous in the first number of weeks. And he said to me, keep coming back. Great things will happen to you when you're in here. And I go, do you fucking hear that? I couldn't, do you know, I heard it, but I couldn't hear it, if that makes sense. Because I thought, you have no idea the shit that I'm in. You have no idea the debts I'm in. Because it was fucking all about me. Do you know what I mean? But like, I've gone back to that guy 50 times. And I've said, that was like, every time something good happened to me, I reflected back on what he said. But now, if I'm saying that to somebody who's going into early recovery, I'd say, you don't want to hear this. He never said you don't want to hear this. But I always say, you don't want to hear this, but... And they'll come back to you again in whatever amount of time, and they'll say, good things are happening to me. You know, things are really starting to, you know, go my direction. Yes, there'll be knocks. Of course there'll be knocks, but you stick with it and these things happen. But again, when that was said to me in the early weeks of my recovery, I was unable to hear, really properly hear it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, of course. And I think that's normal. I mean, I think in the early stages, everybody's very skeptical, and most people probably don't believe in themselves too much. It's interesting you're saying to the counsellor in Coomberra, I'm never going to gamble again, which of course is the plan. But of course, the flip side of that is, from the 12-step approach, is a very sensible approach. You take it one day at a time, right? And I'd say to clients, like, just going back to the thing of trust, that if your partner caught you having an affair, right, and you said to them, do you know what, I promise you I won't have another affair today, that's the best I can do for you. They'd probably tell you to get on your bike, right? But at the same time, from a mindful, the 12-step approach to this is very sensible. It makes perfect sense. You need to eat the elephant one bite at a time. You can't think in terms of, I will never gamble again, I'll never drink again. It's too overwhelming, right? So it's from the perspective of the person in recovery, yes, it has to be one day at a time. But I suppose for the people around you, what they want to hear is, you will never gamble again, ever. Full stop, end of story.
Well, the way I actually developed that after I seen the reaction of the counsellor was that I said, just like you're after saying, I will never gamble again, one day at a time. And that is very, very important. That is very, very important. It's very important to break it down. You talk to anybody who's playing high level sport now, if you guys watch the hurling or the Gaelic football this year, and it's back in the quarters. People are just talking about the quarter. That's all they're talking about now. They're talking about, let's get the first 17 minutes, let's keep it tight, let's do whatever that plan is. But they're breaking it down. Do you know what I mean? And that's it. It has to be like that in early recovery. You have to break it down. You have to say, today is going to be a good day. You pray when you get up, and I say a few prayers when I get up in the morning. And that thing, as far as recovery for me, hasn't changed. But like, again, just to reiterate, whenever I said that, early on, I didn't know enough about recovery not to say that. Yeah. And but yeah, I'll never gamble again, one day at a time.
I love that.
I think I said it once in an aftercare meeting. I went in and said, I'm never going to gamble again. And you could hear the oohs and the ahs in the aftercare. And then I said, once I make sure I do daily reflections, once I make sure I do everything possible to ensure that I don't gamble. In other words, do it day by day. And I think once you keep your eye on that and not look at the bigger picture and just, as you said, like, just develop into the recovery, I think it does really help. I think, like, I just to kind of, I know I'm not coming back in here in the middle of it, but just to come in on a point, like, I think I met you very early in my recovery in Coomberra when I was actually in the treatment. I remember you came in and you probably said something similar to that to me, but I was kind of in the kind of zone of, what does this guy know? Sure, I have this court case to face. I've, whatever's to face afterwards. But I think what I learned, probably through talking to people like yourself who are in recovery and accepting that they must know what they're talking about because they've lived it, they've gone through similar things that I've gone through. I learned how to kind of deal with everything as it came. So, I got out of recovery, dealing with the kind of the shock that was, like, as you were saying just before I went off there, like bringing the pre-season into real life. It's difficult, and I think you do need to keep touching base. And then when the court case came, I had to deal with that, and I kind of took it one step at a time, the prison sentence. Then I dealt with that, and once you can see light at the end of the tunnel, once you're chipping away at those loans, once you see the improvements in the relationships, once you know that you're getting back to where you want to be, or you feel in yourself you're coming back to the person that you know that you are, I think you find that journey you really get enlightened at various stages of it. You kind of go, like, this recovery is brilliant. But at the start, I remember sitting through my first GAA meeting and kind of going, these lads are all off their rockers. They're not as bad as me. They don't. And I very quickly realized that it doesn't have to be any particular story. They had lived it and they were going through the same things that I was going through. And I think that's that kind of connection and that know that you're not alone in that journey. I think that was the one thing that kind of got me through a lot of those dark times in recovery and in the subsequent things I had to deal with coming out of recovery or while in recovery after treatment. And I think for me, that's recovery. For me, that's my recovery in its purest form, because dealing with these things and learn and the growth that you get by getting through these things without going back to gambling, without going to alcohol or drugs or going back into other ways of escapism. For me, that's the learning, and that's what makes sitting here now a good few years in recovery. Be able to say it's probably the best I've ever felt. Or we have our moments, like we all do, everyone does, but by and large, it's not as bad as where we were, or even the darkest days in addiction. So, yeah,
Tony, you're talking as well about the Gamblers Anonymous, the early Gamblers Anonymous. Like,
yeah.
If I took somebody off the street, no relationship with addiction, and they walked into a Gamblers Anonymous meeting, they'd be able to pick out the guys who are long term and the guys who are just in through the door. I remember walking in through the door to my first ever Gamblers Anonymous meeting, and when I went in there, it wasn't what I expected. There was a couple of it was 4 or 5 lads up the top, and they were having a crack. They knew each other. They played golf together. They did, all those things. And I walked in. All I wanted to do was cry. Every time somebody opened their mouth, all I wanted to do was cry. And I'm thinking, these boys have no idea the shit that I'm in. And over time, I realized these boys have been through the exact same thing as I've been through, regardless of how much we've spent or anything else. They've been through the mill the same way as I have. But when I walked in there, I was expecting everybody to be very solemn, very glum, and I soon learned that it wasn't like that. But I still wanted the same thing as I've been sort of chatting to you about all day. I wanted to be the guy over there who was 7 years free. I wanted to be him, and I didn't want to have to wait 7 years to be 7 years free. Do you know what I mean? And that's one thing that I keep hopping back to. But the fact that you do keep going back, and the fact that you're learning so much of the guy who's just in the door or the guy who's there 20 years. And that was the thing for me. And it was the thing for me was to take all of that, as much of that stuff on board as I could. People often say to me, I'm not going back to Gamblers Anonymous meeting, I don't like them. You know what I mean? Or there's somebody talking crap in them. And I said, but you're not there for him. You're there for yourself. And that's what I found very early on. And again, just lucky, there was a guy there who was 14 years free, and I used to hang on his every word. I knew instantly that the stuff that was coming from him was the stuff that I needed to hear, and it wasn't always rosy in the garden with him or anything else. But I felt as if I needed to listen to him. Once I was able to relate to what he was saying, I related to the rest of the room, but in particular, I related to him, and I learned so much off him in that time.
There was a fella in my first meeting as well. I think he was 5 years free at the time, and I was saying I wanted to be him, and I wanted the quick fix. And even like what we were saying about your book earlier on, I was just on to Barry before he came on. I was saying, like, I was running around everywhere looking for your book before I went to treatment, because I thought this will have all the answers. This is a quick fix. And I was reading it kind of as a Carlow man who had very little knowledge of football or hurling or any kind of GAA. I was kind of reading, this is all about GAA. There's no answers in this. But then I did relate to so much of when you talked about the gambling side of it. And what my biggest realization is that from that is kind of, I'm not alone here, but also I need to do this the hard way. I'm not going to get answers. I need to put in the work. I'm not just going to get answers within the first couple of weeks of treatment, either within meetings or within the book. I need to see this out. I need to learn from the people who have been there and done it, and also to be able to ground myself in the people who are coming in after me and kind of recognize that was me a few weeks ago, but now I'm in a lot better place, and for them to see me. So I think I always love going back to the meetings in Athy and the treatment centre, because you get to see a mixture of that. You get to see a mixture of the lads who are coming in since I was there, and the same lads are still going in there today, and fair juice, and they're brilliant, because they were the rock behind my recovery at the very start. They kind of sat down with me with a cup of tea afterwards. That's what you were saying earlier on. It's not the same when it's on Zoom, because you get that cup of tea afterwards, that kind of extra little lift after the meeting. But also, I used to love when I used to come back afterwards and people would see how I'd gone through the 12 week, and they would see my journey. But then also the biggest thing I used to get from it is seeing someone coming in week 2 or 3 when they were allowed to come to the meetings, and then see their development for the next 9 or 10 weeks. And that was, you'd see that that reminds you, I think, of the journey that you've gone on yourself. And I think that's a huge part of recovery.
Yeah, I was going to jump in there with a couple of questions, because I mean, just going back, I know Tony had to duck out for a minute, and we're just kind of getting into some of the nitty gritty, because I think this is the stuff, a lot of the stuff that people really find fascinating, because okay, you can talk about things like people, places, and things. So, Shane, you were talking about earlier on, just kind of classic 12-step across all the different meetings, AA, GAA, NA. But then you're hit with the reality of, well, everybody I hang out with gambles, or everybody I hang out with and socialize with, well, we socialize with alcohol or drugs, right? So if I take all the people, places, and things away, then I'm left with nothing, right? And this is something that comes up a lot across any kind of an addiction, but you'd see it with gambling a couple as well, especially younger guys now. You know, you don't have to be a massive sport head. There's so much gambling connected with it that you could see. Tony, you were talking about this the other day, you know, a group of lads coming in to a pub, they all had the phones out, they're all on different betting sites, and they're checking the prices against different betting sites in real time while watching a match in the pub. Like, I mean, this is the kind of where we're at the moment. I mean, for you, Oisin, like that friends part, did you find that difficult? I mean, did you find that you had to radically change how you socialize? Did you have to isolate a lot?
Yeah, I radically changed it, and for the first 12 months, it was quite easy. I was in Dublin. I was working from 6 to 6. I was coming home. My mum would have a sandwich sitting on the edge of the table in tin foil. I grab it, get my football gear, and head away to football. And sort of that's the way it was sort of just revolved for me for some time. But I changed a lot of the friends instantly. When I say friends, like my core group of friends stayed, but the acquaintances were gone. And the people who I had realised, like when I went to treatment, my family, apart from my family, one other person got in contact with me. That just shows you where I was at. People were fed up with me. That was the first thing. But the people who I was hanging out with at that stage, I mean, they hardly noticed I was gone, or if they knew I was gone, they weren't really that bothered. So when I come out, it was fairly simple to get rid of those people. I had to walk back into 2 change rooms: club change room, county change room. I chose to tell all of the club boys, you know, where I'd gone, and I chose to tell some of the people in the change room who I played with at county level, because I wasn't close to them all. Yeah, we're teammates and all, but wouldn't have been extremely close or anything. So I chose to tell them as individuals, the people that I felt needed to know. But I very quickly got rid of that. And then as far as the things and the places I was going, like part of the ritual for us winning championships or All Irelands or what Ulsters or whatever was you drank on Sunday night and you got up and you headed to the pub on the Monday. And I wouldn't do that anymore, because well, every pub you walk into in the town that I live in would have racing on, and it genuinely wasn't because I felt I would have a bet. It was just I just felt as if I needed to take myself away from those situations, and I needed to make sure I didn't put myself into those situations. So that's what I did. I didn't buy the newspaper. I was very careful about the sport that I watched. I've often, me and Niall McNamee would probably be very similar in that, like, lads, only for sport at this moment in time and through Christmas and all that there, like me and my kids, I genuinely don't know what we would have done. It was darts. It was, we're big into soccer. It was Gaelic on. It was, I love cricket. I love 2020 cricket and all that sort of thing. Like, so we watch a lot of sport. But like my kids are, as I say, are 6 and 6, and the 2 boys are 6 and 8. We girl who's 2, but 2 boys like are constantly asking me, like, the first thing that comes up, at halftime is bet 365, and Ray Winston, I think is his name, and I believe he used to be an actor. at one stage, but he's very much part of the gambling community now. I know that because it's the voice that keeps ringing in my head every time you watch a Premier League game. But my boys are asking now. My boys are asking, what is that? And when they see 10-1, they think, who does that man think's going to win 10-1? That's their relationship with it at the minute. But that's going to have to be explained to them. But the way I look at it is now that it's at saturation point. It probably wasn't as bad when I first came out of treatment, but like to try and avoid even the odds and games and all those sort of things. And the thing about I found about my recovery as well was that for the first 2 years, people generally, even though I didn't want them to, walk on eggshells around me as far as mentioning gambling or anything else. After that 2-year period, people were going to me, such and such is even money at the weekend, great bet. Do you know what I mean? Because people think that, well, he had a problem with that. That's sorted now. You can still have 20 quid on teams at the weekend, or do you know? Because people don't get it, and I can understand that because I didn't get it till I got it either, and until I started to learn about it, and so that for me is the thing. So I would have changed a lot of those things fairly dramatically, and like the access to having no access to money, you know, and people. I don't know if people put enough credence on doing that in early recovery, and I know you guys, you know, because I've heard you speak about, you know, usually be advocates for it, but not everybody is, and I think that those damage limitation things early on are so important. They form a part of the bigger jigsaw, but it's a crucial part, as I say, early on. And for me, I would have changed a lot of things. I would have changed the friends. I would have changed a lot of the things I was doing. I would have been careful that I wasn't in this situation or that situation, and I would have been very careful around that. I'm still careful around it, but I don't. It's not something I think about. It's just something that that comes fairly natural now, because, as I say, you find yourself getting so far removed from everything that is gambling, and I have friends who would have a bet, but they would never be talking to me about that. And again, I've said this on many occasions. I'm not on a crusade to stop everybody from gambling. Do you know what I mean? Like, I know there's people out there who can go and have a bet or have a few quid on whatever it is, and leave it at that. But I'm not one of those people. And therefore, I had to remove myself from all of the situations that I would have put me in any sort of danger. And once you get into those good habits early on, you know, that's a crucial part. I would have taken myself out of stag parties and different things like that, because, you know, I would have felt that, you know, that just wouldn't have been the right place for me and stuff. But yeah, that's just as I protected myself as much as I possibly could, and I threw a lot of self-care in there as well. I say, okay, I'll take the last month out of it, but I've tried to eat fairly healthily, do a bit of exercise, all those things. So they're the things that sort of would have worked for me.
Just to come in on a couple of points there, because you maybe smiled with a few things. Like I remember when I eventually ventured back into the pub after treatment, you know, for a couple of months, and, you know, it was still very much in the public domain, you know, what had happened. But I remember I walked in on a Friday night. My best friend Niall said, like, we used to always play cards on a Friday night. And there's a couple of lads in the corner playing cards. And he said, listen, lads, you may stop playing cards because Tony's here. And I just called him aside and said, listen, if you're going to start doing that, I'm going to stop coming down, because they're entitled to have their game. And I just removed myself from it. And the same fella, he's the best in the world, but the same fella, he always say, he calls me Riley. He says, hey, Riley, I know I shouldn't be talking to you about this, but, and then he'd go into talking about the odds and he'd be laughing away. And I'm like I am so far removed from it now that I can block it off. And I think a big part of that was because my kind of gambling came to light fairly publicly. I think while it was very difficult at the time, I think that has really helped because my friends know about it. And, you know, it was the fact that a lot of my close friends did stay kind of the real me, and they kind of stayed. But now a couple of them that I was surprised that drifted off, and that's fair enough as well. But I think like the majority of people would know that I have a problem with it. So I think They would have tippy-toed around a little bit at the start, but not anymore. They'd be slagging me about it and talking about odds to me. Now I just block it off. But definitely with Ray Winston, it's one of the ones that gets me, because if you do catch that ad beforehand, you're starting to think about certain aspects of the game. Like, you might be switched off to the normal advertising, but because he's saying a certain player is going to score or a certain team is going to win a certain amount, it does draw you into it. Like I talked about Liverpool United, or not, Liverpool City, before Christmas, when he came on and said City were 2-1 to win whatever price it was or whatever. And then I remember watching the game and Kevin De Bruyne missed the penalty. And it was only after the game I said, geez, that bet could have come up. Or, that would have been a good price. And that's going back to my old way of thinking. So you find that sometimes you drift back to old ways of thinking, and you just have to catch yourself each time and kind of cut it down. But I find that ad is one of the biggest ones that has a huge impact on me. If I try not to watch it, so I tend to go for a cup of tea or try to just go in at the start of the match and leave at half time. But it is one of the ones that does get me thinking. And just kind of, you talk with your two sons, and they're at the age when they're looking at that. My daughter's 10, and she turned around and said to me, what's Ladbrokes? And I remember we had stopped at the traffic lights and water before, and the Ladbrokes, and she asked me what it was, and I explained it's a place where people go in, and I tried to explain it in a way. And now I still have to go and explain my whole story to her whenever that's right, and that's going to be a tough conversation. But if I was just looking back at when I was 10, the names I saw on the shirts were Sharp, JVC, Crown Paints, Iveco, all those, but now it's all gambling related. So it is at that stage where it's saturated. You're looking at the matches now, it's all the hoardings, all betting. And like, I'm sure, we're all in around the same age, and sponsors from when we were 10, because, when you're growing up, you do remember them all. And I think that's the worrying bit, because they're being just prompted to gamble, and it's becoming normalised as well.
That's a brilliant point. I've never actually thought about that before. The Sharp and because I would be into the retro jerseys and stuff now as well, and the lads are getting the odd retro jersey, and that's exactly it. And I always remember the big ones for me were the Sharp and the Crown Paints and stuff. But I don't know. I don't know if you go through this and edit this afterwards, Barry or Tony. But I'm going to tell you this one that I was told as well in Gamblers Anonymous. But there was a new guy in. He said he was talking a little bit of Tony about what you were saying. He was saying, I was looking in the paper today, and I seen the results this evening, and if I had it back, I would have backed those 3 horses, and I would have got a fortune. Instead, I'm in here, and and the boy stopped him, and he said, "Do you know what you call that?" And he says, "That's called masturbating your brain." And and he said, "Stop it immediately." And it was also good advice. This thing about buying papers, looking at what I have done, what I have done, all that sort of thing. I mean, that's that's a complete no.
Yeah. And people, sorry. No, people, that comes up all the time. People torture themselves with that crack, and it's very, very easy to look at yesterday's lotto numbers and go, "Oh, jeez, I would have picked them." Right? You would in your hole, right? And in the same way, if you're looking at yesterday's racing results, it's very easy to go, "Oh, I like that jockey, and I like that trainer, I like that horse," and then in your head you're putting it into a Yankee, or you're putting it into a Lucky 15, and straight away you're going, "Oh, I would have paid off all my debts if I'd only put 100 quid onto that bet." And it's torture. Masturbating.
You might have edited this bit out. It's like saying, if my auntie had a Mickey, she'd be my uncle.
I mean, sorry, I know we're eating up a lot of your time here, Oisin, but there's one thing, because I know people listening to this, and I know people that we work with, and people who contact us in the helpline and emails and stuff like that. They'll be listening to you saying, "Okay, my sister was managing my finances for 6 years," and they'd be going, "Jesus Christ, I go bananas when my missus is managing my finances for 6 days or 6 weeks." And for a lot of people, we'd recommend that it would be longer than that. And the sort of stuff that comes up is, it's usually the man is they're in the petrol, they're out in the car, and they realize there's not enough petrol in the car, and they've no money, and they can't, they run out of petrol, or come close to running out of petrol, or they get a flat tire and they can't pay for it because they've no bank card and no cash. And these kind of, I suppose, unusual types of situations can crop up sometimes, and then people, it can cause conflict in the relationship sometimes. I mean, over a 6-year period, when your sister was managing your money for you, did you kind of run into those situations, or did you have it kind of fairly well set up that you could kind of manage the day to day?
No, never. And anytime I did, she was just a phone call away. I agree with you totally. I sit in front of you know, who's going to manage your finance? My wife's going to manage. For example, my wife's going to manage my finances. Completely agreeable to it. Hands up, not a problem. And then all of a sudden, maybe contact them then in 6 weeks. Or the wife will contact me and say, listen, I'm not managing his finances anymore. He lost a head. He said it was his money, all that sort of thing. And that's generally speaking the way that runs. So what I like to do is I like a little contract at that stage. It doesn't have to put a certain amount of time on it, but just saying that how happy you are for that person to look after your finances. So 3 weeks down the lane, you're not saying, I didn't agree to this, or this is not the way I thought it was going to be. But like the Revolut card or those sort of things, they're the obvious solutions to things like that. And I think the fact that other person has a little bit of ownership, and that you have to go, or I would have to go, and I would have to say, listen, can I have 60 quid because I have to do X? Have you, right? Well, you go and do that, and you wouldn't show me the receipt or send me a picture of receipt. That's how far this has to go. That's how far the ownership of this sort of thing has to go. And again, you just can't stress the importance of that, while all the other stuff, yes, is going on, and the thoughts and the feelings and the emotions are coming back, and all those sort of things. But this is side of thing is a crucial part of it. But I think no harm to have some sort of contract that says, yes, I'm quite happy with doing that, because I often talk about gambling. Like when we went in to have our first child, my wife looked at me. She was in the passenger seat, child was in the back seat. I was driving, and my wife looked at me and she said, "See, have a good look around you here, because I'm not coming back in here to go through all that again." Okay? Because the pain of the pain of the pregnancy, of the labor, that was all still going on in our head. And yet we found ourselves back in there twice. And the reason why I reflect on it like that is because, like, I have people all the time who come to me and say, listen, I need to get into a treatment center. Okay, a lot of that can be alcohol, because you have the physical effects and different things like that. But they'll come to me and they'll say, listen, I need to get in somewhere. And you try to facilitate, you try and arrange that, and all of a sudden maybe you contact them 2 days later, 3 days later, and you get onto the phone, and this person's going, what are you talking about? I'm not going in anywhere. I feel great. I feel fine. Couldn't feel any better. And that same person is banging on your door a month later, wondering, can I get into a treatment centre again? And you've got a 48-hour window to try and turn that around. But that's why I sort of, you reflect on it in that way, because when that hurt of the gambling and the losing and the despair and the self-loathing and the relationships breaking down and friendships and all those sort of things, when they're actually when you're really, really sensitive to those things, and it's just happened to you, you will agree to anything in order to move the situation along. But that changes because the hurt goes away a little bit. And when it's when the hurt goes away to still have that motivation to be single-minded enough to go on and still get yourself into recovery. And that's the thing. And I understand, like myself, there was lots of false dawns. There's lots of times where I woke up in the morning and said, no, that's me. I'm never gambling again. And yet I find myself in the bookies an hour later. And that's, that was a revolving cycle door type operation for some time. And then eventually, couldn't take any more of it. I stopped gambling because I couldn't take any more. Literally couldn't take any more. It's going to cost me my life. And that's when I I was going to say I decided. I don't know if I should say that. It decided that I had to get in recovery, or it was going to take my life. And once the proactive stuff started, then it's not easy. Don't get me wrong, but it's doable.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean that what you're talking about there with the contracts, with the finances, I think is there's definitely something in that. Quite often myself and Tony, we get the partner in and we try and sit people down and negotiate something, because like that, like your wife coming out after having the first child, I think I remember that as well. Hollis Street in Dublin, my wife going, "We're never coming back here. We're done." And of course we had the second child, but like it's that thing of, you know, at bread is soon forgotten. You know, you forget the pain of the thing, whatever the painful experience was, and you go, you know, we've all had horrible hangovers. Well, I certainly have, from a night out on the booze. Yeah, a night on the booze where you swore blind, never again, and then you cut to 2 or 3 weeks later and you're doing the exact same thing. So like we humans
eating, if people can't relate to that, even eating, you know, you especially over Christmas night, you eat. You eat a ridiculous amount of food, and you wake up the next morning, you go to bed that night, and you go, "Tell you what, I am never doing that again." And you roll around all night and you don't sleep, and you get up the next morning, and you know you eat clean for about 3 hours, and then all of a sudden you're stuck back in that press again, that dreaded press that everybody has in the house. But yeah, so like people might be able to relate to it in that way as well.
And there's one other thing, Tony, I know you probably want to come in there with something, but just that idea of being accountable and transparent with your money. Like you were saying earlier on, I think Tony had to duck out for a sec, that it was kind of about 4.5 years into your recovery when you felt trusted by your nearest and dearest again. Like, and again, that it's going to be different for different people. But that thing of, if you're being open and accountable and transparent about money, which is such a big part of gambling, if you can do that, you can push up that timeline of regaining trust. And like we touched on earlier on, regaining the trust is the longest thing in anybody's recovery that I've come across. You know, people can knock gambling on the head. Okay, that's a process. That's a day-to-day process. They can work on themselves. They can do their own personal development. That's a process as well. And you can get into a good place in a reasonably short time frame for a lot of people, certainly into a much better place. The trust thing can take a long time. That's the biggest project, I think. And that's the thing that people don't expect. They think stopping gambling is going to be hard. It is, but you know, it's doable. And they think that maybe working on the underlying issues is going to be hard, and it can be, but again, it's doable. But they don't expect the trust thing as the thing that really rattles a lot of people. And again, It can be a trigger to relapse too. But if you're being open, you're being accountable, you're being transparent about the money, you're bringing home the bloody receipts. People hate doing it. They feel like a child. They feel emasculated. I'm sorry, that's just the price of admission.
That's just the way it is. Yeah.
But you make peace with, just to quickly just finish up on that, there's the same fella that I was looking to say, and I want to be him 5 years. He was 5 years recovery. That fella now is probably 14 years recovery. And he'll always say he still keeps the receipts in the glove compartment of his car. And his wife will always say, "Would you stop keeping them? You don't need them." He says, "I do it for me. It's as much for me as it is for you." And that's the accountability. And like, you know, even when my money comes in, I transfer the majority to my partner. And there's that transparency that was there, that wouldn't have been there at any time before, gambling or not gambling. No one would have known. And I think that's the thing. I think I've made peace with that side of it. And it's the ability not to have to hide anything from anyone. And that's recovery in a nutshell. But it is that whole thing of, I think with the contract and stuff like that, with money, it has to be something that works both for the partner and for the person, and you have to find that balance, which is not always easy, and that works for both. And the Revolut card is always a good way of doing it, because there is that accountability, or you can cut off certain aspects of it that you can't take money over an ATM, you can just tap or whatever that looks like. But also, you have to. I know I've worked with someone long term before, and he was saying that he takes ownership, but he still does to control money, and he's made total peace and he's fine with it. And they said, I transfer money in every month, and I'm okay with that too. There's absolutely no problem with that side of it either. So yeah, it's just about mindset around it as well as much as anything else, I think, and just kind of accepting this is part and parcel of recovery. And the reality is that I don't want to ever go back to where I was, so it's a small price to pay. And it is still your money, it is still the couple's money, so it's not like you can't have any access to it. You just have to have a bit of accountability.
I mean, just before I finish up, Bushy, I mean, at the moment you're working with Sporting Chance, and I mean, you touched on Tony Adams early on, and I love that quote. I've mangled it a few times. I keep quoting it to clients and I keep messing it up, but it's that one, the best thing about recovery is getting all your feelings back. I'm paraphrasing here. And of course, the worst thing about recovery is also getting all your feelings back. And that, again, you're talking about the trust, but I mean, that part of the project where, again, people don't often expect that, because like yourself, I mean, Tony's kind of different in that he started gambling in his 20s. I think you started gambling in your teens, if I remember correctly, which a lot of young lads would do. And if that's your kind of go-to thing from an early age for dealing with difficult situations or relieving boredom, relieving stress, or kind of dealing with good days, dealing with bad days, and you take that away and it's like, oh, hang on, I have to deal with all this stuff without the thing, my go-to thing.
Yeah.
I think that's the other part. That's what real recovery looks like, is learning how to do that. Now, that's a process as well. I mean, with Sporting Chance, is it predominantly kind of educational stuff that you're doing there with sports people?
Yeah, education, majority of it around gambling, but dangerous behaviours. So we would mainly be talking to football league clubs, Premier League clubs, jockeys, darts players, rugby league players, so that's sort of who you're talking. Normally when you're talking to Premier League clubs, it's normally the academies and stuff like that. So it's a pretty captive audience. It's something that, they have to do as part of their contract. So whether they like it or not, they're there. But I suppose when it's on Zoom, they literally could be asleep if they really wanted to be. But and that's why, again, that interaction and being in that room with these guys is obviously much more beneficial. But we have to make do with what we have for now, and that's the way it's been for now. And as I say, it's very short. It's 35 minutes or so. The actual education piece. and it is, as I say, it's beneficial for lads, because the reports that we would be getting back from clubs is no different to what's happening here in GAA clubs and all that. It's rife. It's the go-to thing now during lockdown. I very naively thought that lockdown would give some people a reprieve. I thought the people I was thinking about was families mainly, that they would get some sort of reprieve from the person in the house, gambling or whatever. But obviously that's gone completely the other way now, and that has to be worrying, especially when you consider the first time around we didn't really have any sport, at all. So. I think that's another one of the reasons why, you talked earlier, Barry, about the things we can gamble on, or the go-to things, and doesn't necessarily be sport, and then you open up a whole new demographic to gambling. And then, like they say, the biggest influx of people into Gamblers Anonymous are women between the ages of 25 and 45, and how difficult it is for a woman to walk into that scenario where there's, like, I've been in lots of Gamblers Anonymous meetings where a woman has walked in, she stayed, but they find themselves unable to come back because it is so male dominated. So there's a lot of women out there at the minute who are struggling big time as well.
Sorry, Tony, I don't know if you wanted to come in there. Yeah, that is something that comes up with female clients sometimes, because yeah, they try out the local GA meeting. They could be the only woman in the room, unfortunately. And I suppose the statistics from around the world will bear that out. It's kind of 80-20 males. I mean, if it's a small group, you know what I mean, there's a decent chance that a woman going in first time could be the only woman in the room. And I suppose it also skews in that women tend to go more towards things like slot machines, roulette, stuff like that, casino, online, especially online casino type games, and the men more towards sports. So then you get those two degrees of alienation, because, okay, first of all, there's the gender thing, and then there's a lot of the sports gamblers would be looking at people who play slots going, you're off your head. Right? Do you know what I mean? Ironically enough, like, it's all gambling at the end of the day, but there's this kind of lack of comprehension between the two groups. Like, you know, quite often now some people would gamble on all kinds of everything and kind of bleeds across the two. And that thing, like, I mean, myself and Tony are Man United and Liverpool fans, respectively, and we were kind of giving each other
Man United as well.
Yeah, go on, nice. And we're giving each other grief, you know, kind of ahead of the match at the weekend just gone by. And I was looking at, I regularly check the Sky Sports app, and I kind of check the articles on Man U. And there was an article. It wasn't even an article. It was like, Gary Neville says there'll be 4 corners in the first half. I'm like, going, what is this? Right. Jamie Carragher says there'll be a yellow card in the second half. It's like, this isn't an article. This is creating a betting market for these stupid bets, right? And Sky Sports don't even own Sky Bet anymore because that's part of Flutter. Like, so I mean, this is the level that we're at, right? That it's supposedly an article. It doesn't say that it's an advertisement. They're making these predictions about these ridiculous markets of these silly bets that loads and loads of people do, especially young lads. And this is where we're at, you know.
Well, I wrote an article on in April about virtual Grand National, and I thought that was one of the most disgusting things as in relation to I don't know if you want to call it cheap marketing or whatever you want to call it, but it made the news, you know, and it made mainstream news, it made RTE news, 6-1 News, and it was all under the gaze of raising money for the NHS or the HSE, and I just honestly, just very little gets me railed when it comes to this stuff, because I think us gays probably have seen. People in general have seen the most of these things, but that was one thing that really got me. And I hate sitting down and writing articles. I hate doing it. I hate doing it. I would do stuff on a dictaphone or something, but I hate sitting down and writing. I just sat down and I just couldn't stop writing, and I wrote and I wrote and I wrote and I wrote. Now none of it made any sense. Most of it was ranting and raving, but whenever I was able to look over it again and actually, you know, condense it into something that people might appreciate or might understand. But I just thought, well, that was one of them to use that, you know, that raising money thing, just, you know, to entice people back in, and the fact that mainstream media could not see that just it railed me. It railed me, as I say, that much. I just had to sit down and do something I don't particularly like doing that was right.
Yeah, and you were right. I remember that article, and it was utterly disgusting and so transparent as well, what they were trying to do, which was a trawling exercise to get millions of people's email addresses signed up for accounts so they could flog them stuff, they could send them marketing emails, they could send them free bets, you know, which cost them nothing because there's so many terms and conditions connected to them, in the guise of, oh, aren't we great? We're raising money for the NHS during a global pandemic. You know, this is at the height of the pandemic, and kind of make it. And at the same time, I think because it was a virtual Grand National, because all sports were off, even horse and greyhound racing was off at that point. So it was also a reminder that, hello, folks, even though real sports are off,
we're still here.
We're still here. You can do virtuals 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Even if there's a zombie apocalypse, you can do that stuff. Never mind a global pandemic. It'll just keep going, right? So you were so bang on about that. And it was such a sickener. And it was so, I think it said a lot about a lot of the media outlets, the fact that they didn't catch on to that straight away. Again, the gambling industry is one of the few industries that's actually making money during this pandemic. They're a huge advertiser. That feeds into the kind of media attention that they get as well. Anyway, that's a whole other ballgame. I know we're eating into your time here. Tony, any questions for us before we let him get back?
Two quick ones, and the first one is, like, with that, I'm not anti-gambling in any shape or form, but stuff like that does rile me as well. And Barry has to kind of cull a lot of the stuff that I'm going to put. I nearly press post online, so I do get a little bit riled up with stuff like that, because I'd imagine you'll agree that there's still a lot of the same failings that are there from your time and from my time gambling that are still there, and people are still falling into the trap. And I suppose last question is, do yourself and Barry think United will actually win the league this year?
Well, as you know, being a Man United fan, that we are as deluded as the next. So yeah, I do agree. I think
Well,
we
no,
will.
Barry,
I think we have a great chance.
I'm the Liverpool. I'm deluded. I was deluded for 30
Oh,
years. Barry's
you are right. Okay.
I was deluded for 30 years. Next year will be our year. But again, I just want to say thanks a million for going on. I know I missed a bit of it. I'll probably catch up on it all later on. So it's
Yeah,
brilliant.
enjoyed it, lads. Thanks very much.
I
That's
really
my therapy.
appreciate
That's
it.
my therapy done for the day.
Mine too.
Penance, Barry. It's my therapy. Brilliant. Thanks again for coming on.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.